Welcome to the Green Jobs Media Series. I'm your host, Jose, and this is a space where we talk about the intersection of circularity, urban sustainability, climate justice, and land regeneration, specifically looking at how we can help people, especially BIPOC youth, access jobs that can be in sustainability and in green ecosystems of work, because we believe in better places and communities for everyone. Today, we have the amazing chance to talk with Aish Mann. Aish has tons of experience migrating to Canada and setting herself in a space of change. And you're going to be laughing at me with this one because Aish will tell us a bit more about her roles with leading change and as well with threading change. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Very privileged to be here. So just a little bit about myself, just to give everybody a bit of a background. So I'm the Programs and Marketing Coordinator at Leading Change Canada, and I'm also the Development and Impact Director at Threading Change. So at Leading Change Canada, we specifically work on youth capacity building across all sectors and really getting young people and the next generation of sustainability professionals in rooms with the key decision makers. So we started out with our flagship, signature event, which is our Leading Change Convention conference. Now we're calling it Summit. We just rebranded.
Oh, okay.
A little bit of a plug. We've also have our Leading Change Fellowship that really dives deep into actual skills building and tools where we pick handful of young people and we train them and also provide knowledge and tools to actually go and be change makers. And then we also have Leading Change Connections, which is a virtual and sometimes in-person networking session where we get folks in a room and just, get to know each other and learn what they're up to. And it is across Canada. And then at Threading Change, we're an ethical fashion nonprofit. We are based out of Vancouver. We started out in Vancouver, but we are now all across Canada and globally. So we have an Africa hub, a Europe hub. We have folks in Latin America, in Asia, and we have programming across the world. So depending on the region that we're in, we have different priorities. So like in Canada, North America, Europe, generally, it's about education and raising awareness on fast fashion and ethical use of clothing. So we conduct clothing swaps, events, educations, policy jams, workshops, learning how to sew, things like that. Our Africa hub specifically works on waste and the waste that's already there. So our amazing Africa regional coordinator, Janet, she really helps, really bring that information about the clothing waste that exists in the Nairobi River and different dump sites and what they look like, and we get to amplify that. So that's sort of the two organizations, and I specifically work on building programming at Leading Change and marketing, and at Threading Change I'm more impact measurement, strategy. I ideate a lot of future plans for Threading Change and how we can grow. So, yeah.
So, you're usually not really busy. It's really easy to catch you.
Oh my God, I just be napping all day.
That's what most people in Canada might be saying about immigrants these days, which is not true. Wow, that's just incredible. I think that the wide range of skills that you have, and you look really young. I don't think we're that different of age. I think that it's just impressive how much you've...
It's the Asian genes.
Oh, no, maybe that is it, yeah. But regardless, I do find that it is inspiring to see people who are being able to come through. Despite the lack of representation that so often we see in leadership, and the fact that you're leading that change is just great. And I promise that's the last time I make a joke with the names.
Leading change. I also be threading change.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
So building from the spirit of understanding a bit better how you came to be in these roles, and not just to really call you these different positions that you hold, but really get to know you and come to understand what have been the different points of your life that have led you to become who you are. And you can go as far back as when I was 5 years old. My mom told me X and Y. But truly, I want to, help out the public understand how Aish came from, whatever could be your humble beginning or your passionate time doing a craft and realizing to who you are and where you are.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was 2 years old, just kidding. So I am originally from Malaysia. I've only really been in Canada just over 2 years. So I moved here in 2022. I used to be a journalist. I used to work in advertising and I used to promote sustainable tourism to one of our regions in Borneo Island. So the Borneo Island, if folks don't know, is just as diverse as the Amazon, but it is being massively deforested. There isn't enough conservation around it. And I worked with a lot of the indigenous communities there just to understand different cultures and also archive a lot of the cultural practices through the through the tourism board of the state that I worked with, Sarawak, that's the state. And before that, I was a journalist for a while. My bachelor's is in economics, so I covered economic and political news in Malaysia. And for anybody who's curious, my first language is English. I know, usually first thing that people ask me is like, "Oh, you speak very good English." Yes, we were colonized by the British. So yes, I speak English. So English news and used to cover a lot of the politics, and the house that I grew up in, we were always very politically aware. My mom is the kind of person, so again, we follow the British system. So my mom is the type of person, you can just name a random constituency and she will know the MP's name, by heart, just that kind of person. So we were very politically educated back home, and so it was very natural for me to follow that path and ask the questions and sort of always be curious.
I have a question here.
Yeah.
Is the stuff that your parents do related to the stuff that you do currently?
No, my parents were both educators. So both, my mom was a public school teacher for 31 years and retired, and now she's an early childhood teacher. And my dad, he was a university librarian. And by the way, I am adopted. So I have my own biological family that was not as supportive, but I was a teenager when I was adopted. So I sort of, when I say my parents, my adopted parents, and they were the ones who sort of gave me a space to learn and grow for the first time in my life. And so I speak of them, and they really instilled this love of nature for me. One of the bonding things that initially my mom and I had were us going on hikes in the rainforest. So I'm originally from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and it's a big city. And so we don't have a lot of nature, but there was little pockets of nature we could find, and that was our bonding thing that we used to do on weekend mornings. So yeah, learned a lot from them. They always instilled this passion for learning and asking questions and always being your best self and offering the best that you could. And so I graduated, kind of jump ahead a little bit, and I worked.
Went on a hike, graduated.
Yeah, well, it was background, and then coming back to where I was, my degree and my work that after I graduated from my bachelor's. So a lot of it was just exposure and really understanding the systems and that persisted. But the thing about a lot of Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, is that you can't really just ask questions without expecting backlash. And so that was my story as well. And it sometimes gets very dangerous for you to be home and be the free question asking person. So very quickly, that sort of was very clear to me that if I really wanted to make some sort of change, I could not do it while I was there without jeopardizing my family's safety, my own safety, not to mention the systems that exist, are deeply racist and it's institutionalized. So Malaysia is a Muslim country, so, as a non-Muslim woman, I could not really hold positions of power or ask questions or access even resources that I've been able to access over here ever since moving here, which is, by the way, just over 2 years. Like, I tell this to folks back home. And even here, like the amount of opportunity that I've received here, I never in 10 lifetimes would I have gotten that back home. And so I'm very, very grateful for that. So.
Absolutely. And that's a thing that so often as immigrants,
yeah.
We're really often in the climate and social justice, more liberal side of things, critical of all of the limitations and sort of colonial foundations of everything. But then you come to terms with a lot of the opportunities that you can access and the differences. Like, I find it so inspiring how, and unfortunately, but you have to go through all of those levels of danger and commitment and compromising yourself and your loved ones in these situations that are for good reasons. And, you came out of it. And for me, before even starting a professional pursuit in Mexico, I already knew that, being a reporter or, the statistics speak for themselves on land defenders and just all these front lines that are so either corrupt or dangerous. And then, that is where you see value in, to some extent, the strength and the cleanliness of Canadian institutions and nation in some way.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, being here, I can't, it is also the Canadian companies that are causing the problems back home, Malaysia, Borneo specifically, timber mining, a lot of that. Europe, they say that we want to have all this policy and, we are like green and circular economy policies and all. Most of the timber that is, coming out of our forests is being shipped to Europe. So Europe is our largest importer of timber. And that is causing a lot of the violence and the corruption. So it's again like, sure, they're clean on the, facing the public here, it's clean. Yeah. But, I've seen the other side. So,
and facing that complexity.
Yeah, for sure. So it is, I take it with, a grain of salt. Is that this expression? But yeah, I sort of, I see the cost that my people have paid for them to be this clean. So,
I would like to search a bit on more of that caveat, but you're speaking from a place of identity and who do you align with? And especially as an immigrant, something that I've come to terms a lot in the climate space and just in climate justice and sustainability overall is that, centering Indigenous knowledge and centering indigeneity specifically is really important. And for me, and I always tell this with friends, is like, how do we connect more with the land? How do we return to those roots? Are you finding ways in which your identity, indigeneity can be represented and advocated for in your current work?
So just to clarify, I am not Indigenous to any lands. My people, I'm originally Punjabi, but I'm like fourth generation Malaysian. So my great grandparents and grandparents were brought over to Malaya at the time by the British to maintain order, as a lot of, Indian diaspora, at the time they were, displaced because of British rule. But then again, before that, folks were nomadic, so not Indigenous. But at the same time, I think there is a little bit of beauty in sort of being not really belonging, because then it's sort of, the entire world is somewhere that you can find home. And so I think I sort of take it as that. Especially BC, I really make the connection because I grew up in the rainforest, and we've got a rainforest here, so that's the connection I usually sort of make. And to me, I think like it's all about finding your own community and your own people, and back home, like because of the system that I grew up in, I was always the only one in the entire room, and there were always these microaggressions, and so I very quickly understood I was very familiar with being alone and the only one in the room always, and also understood the importance of creating my own community. And so I kind of do that wherever I go. And yeah, that's how like I came here too. Like, didn't really know anybody, didn't really know much about anything, and just sort of got on a plane, and here I was. And just sort of figured it out through like Facebook Marketplace and YouTube videos on like how to get set up. And like I watched extensively YouTube videos on like how to get your SIN number and how to register for MSP and things like that. So, all that.
Yeah, it's a ton of labor that comes into your life as well. And it's just, but I really enjoyed how you described it. And thank you for making an acknowledgement on, your belonging and identity, and because it's complex, and third plus gen kids know it.
Yeah.
But truly, I think that if we aim to reconnect with the connection we have to the places where we are and become better guests, it is about searching for those stories and looking for how perhaps, as simple as your connection with the rainforest, either that being in Malaysia or here, it signifies so much. And it seems like you're working at least on protecting, the general idea of those spaces for you. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
Of course. And I think there's also merit in, because through my work and connecting with the Indigenous communities back home, and then coming here and learning so much from the Indigenous communities here, I can't help but notice how similar the values are. And, we're like half a planet away. The flying time to Malaysia, I'm heading home soon. And it's going to be 23 hours minimum flying.
Wow.
They're so far apart, but just the values are so similar. And I think it is also important to recognize that we're inherently interconnected. There was, I forget the name of the series. It was on, I think, Netflix, on how everything is connected. And they talked about how the sand from the Sahara Desert is what fertilizes the Amazon. And so just, that kind of, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it.
I see them.
Just thinking about that, we're inherently connected, and it's just hard not to feel at home than in like a new setting of nature. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Beautifully said. I see a lot of meaning, and I struggle to understand how the way that you speak connects to the corporate spaces where you can work. And that is one thing that I have been quite impressed by looking at the work that's being done, both at Leading Change and at Threading Change. I think there is a very good way of mixing, if not braiding, a little bit of the different ways of seeing in these spaces. So maybe you can talk a bit about how that experience has been, and perhaps, there's a lot of youth that will be coming out of their organizing life or from their activism and university years. And then suddenly they are faced with this decision of, do I go fully corporate? Do I go to the 9 to 5? Especially Gen Z, that is not as submissive as other generations have been, which can be a good and bad thing. But what is that like?
I don't really see myself as like a corporate person as well. Leading Change and Threading Change are both registered nonprofits, and I do work in the youth mobilizing space as well. However, it's not very much, shouting at the picket fence per se. But I do think a lot of it has to do with the kind of mentors we have, like as organizations as well, like our board members, and also personally, my colleagues, we just have folks that we've surrounded ourselves with who actually guide us. And it brings me back to that first Leading Change conference that I attended, which was in Toronto last year, where like one of the themes was about intergenerational collaboration. And I think just bridging that gap between organizing and then also corporate sustainability, I am gonna reach just a little bit, but I think just surrounding yourself with mentors can really help guide your direction. Do like stop me if I'm not like making sense. But I think it's very important to, even as you're transitioning and you want to be making change, there's just so many incredible folks that are out there that they are there, they understand the vibe, they understand what needs to be done, but they're making change in their own way, and they're happy and eager to learn. Like I've had incredible mentors that have like helped me, like if I'm like, oh, this organization needs to be shut down, or this oil and gas, whatever, needs to be shut down, they will like help me rephrase that to be a little bit more diplomatic, because they're like, we don't want to shut the conversation. We want to make sure that, you can actually work with them to create change. And I know that it comes with, again, a lot of nuance, not saying that, oil and gas is the best, whatever. But as you transition to corporate, I think there needs to be a little bit of sense of like, okay, learn from people who are there, and then see how you can apply that to your work. And especially as like my experience does not reflect the Canadian youth experience, because I've also had to like learn a lot of things about like networking and how to be in corporate spaces specifically. And so I've always had questions like, hey, how do I word this better? And I'll just be like texting my mentor. I'm like, okay, I've said this. Does this make sense? Or, my mentor is always like, focus on solutions. We know the problems already. So let's go. Let's focus solutions.
Can you expand a bit on, how your mentor came to be connected to you, and what were the things that inspired you from them?
So in order to answer that, I have to go back to how my journey was and where I met her and how I came to be there. So I was looking for work since I had arrived in Canada, and for the first time ever, I started working at a restaurant, because I realized that even though I had years of experience, and I was applying to these jobs that I thought I was perfectly qualified to do, I was not hearing back from any of these. So obviously, while I wanted to pay the bills, so I started working at restaurants, and I was a server, and before that, a bar back and all of that. So learned a lot of skills there as well, and actually they were like really good at also learning about Canadians and like Canadian culture, because you get to talk to everybody every day, and like you learn so much.
What was one of the first shocks you had from Canadian culture?
I think the first was just 4 seasons, because like Malaysia's tropical. I'd never experienced 4 seasons before. And I arrived here, right after a snowstorm, seeing snow for the first time.
Really?
Yeah, never.
Wow.
And I didn't really have that many winter clothes. I just had one jacket that my aunt had given me, and like, because you don't have winter clothes there, right? And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna get here and then like get my boots and everything. And then I arrived here that first few days. I was just like, before I arrived here, I could not fathom, like, what do you mean outside air is cold? Like, and there, I just, in my head, I could not imagine it until I arrived here, and I was like, oh, okay. I see what you mean. And then it was right after a snowstorm, and then I was wearing like sneakers like these, and by the way, my socks.
Yay, the socks. It's ajolotes. I love them.
I was wearing sneakers like these and walking in slush while trying to get to this mall to get like actual boots, not the Cumberland boots, Timberland boots. And I think that was like my first shock out of everything. And then I think also because I grew up in like a Southeast Asian city. Like Kuala Lumpur is a big city. I was kind of underwhelmed by like North American cities, or like Vancouver is small, and I thought like there would be more. So I think that was like my shocks. So anyway, back to the topic. So I was looking for jobs, was not getting anything until I was like applying to these climate consulting firms. You know, I had started looking at LinkedIn. First of all, learned about the concept of informational interviews for the first time. You know, back home, it's you just apply to a job. If you're qualified, you get hired. It's a very simple, clear-cut process. I found very quickly that that was not the case here. And so I applied to this one job and did not get it. It was an internship. And I was like, okay. I think at that point, I had been at it for like almost a year now, and I was not getting any results. And I was like, it was like a point of desperation where I was like, okay, what can I do better? And I replied to a rejection email for the first time, and I was like, can I get feedback, please? And this person was very calm and, you know, very helpful. And they actually like gave me like 3 points on like what to do better. And they were like, you have to be out there and network, and you got to do informational interviews. And then they were like, go in and like talk to people. And I was like, okay, in the spirit of networking, would you be interested in an informational interview? And so I had a call with them, and then they were from U of T. And so they told me that, you know, there's like actual in-person places you can go to. They told me about leading change. Initially, as this like, you know, I looked at the application. They told me about that, you know, applications were open. I looked at it, and it was only for Canadians. And as I went ahead and applied anyway, because I was at that point where, you know, I was just very desperate, and I was like, you know, the worst they can say is no. So I applied, and I actually got in. And so this was like January 2023, and February I went to Toronto with, you know, mind you, I'm a student, and I had just sort of been in between jobs at this point. So I had like very little money, you know, booked like a very dingy hostel to like stay in, where I think 4 nights was like $150. So you can imagine how that place was. But I was very desperate, because that was like, I don't know why, but I just had this feeling that I had to be there. And it was also around a snowstorm time. My flight was canceled 5 times. And they, like Air Canada, they kept rebooking me on different routes. Or like, they were like, we can refund you or something. And I was like, no, I really want to go. So like, I was rerouted like 5 times, and then finally made it to Toronto like 10 hours later than what was expected. Got in, the hostel was very crappy. And I think downright dangerous, but I was desperate. But the thing is, it kind of paid off. So went for leading change. It was just like a 3-hour programming. But what I loved about the space was everybody was just so welcoming and open. And like my first interaction that I had with someone, you know, these people were there, and they were like, I'm an analyst for this thing. This is, again, just the youth convention so far. Like, I haven't talked to the larger globe people yet. And they were like, I'm an analyst. I run this organization. I met Lauren there, and like, she was telling me all the cool stuff that, you know, she was doing. And I was like, oh, I'm just a student, to this one person. And then they were like, you're not just a student. They like stopped me right there, and they're like, no, you have something to offer. And I was like, and I think that was also another shock, where I was just like, oh, you know, this is neat. And then there was like another session where Mike Gerbis, he, you know, gave us a few tips on like how to network effectively, and you know, actually how to carry yourself, and like how to ask the right questions. And, you know, being a journalist, I've already sort of had that training. And so it was just like learning those mannerisms, and like how to dip in and out of conversations, and like three's a crowd, that kind of thing, you know. Anyway, so learned that. And then I saw the Larger Globe conference, and like I had been learning all this theory in class, but for the first time I actually got to see the people who are actually doing the work, and I could be in the same rooms as them and walk up to them and ask questions. And the thing about me is, again, journalist training, I have no shame. I will go up to people. I will get in your face. And so I just went up to people and I was like, hey, that was very cool. I'd love to know more. I'm a student. I'm like still figuring out everything. And I would just like get their name card or like connect on LinkedIn. And then I saw my mentor, Elizabeth Shirt Campbell. She is the CEO of Globe. And it was very interesting because obviously, like this is places where like CEOs of Shell Canada were there and, there were ministers there. And it can be a very intimidating space, especially as somebody who's at that point not achieved much in the space. And like I saw Elizabeth sort of just taking up this space and she was just very inspiring to me and how she was able to like hold space for the conversation and the way that she could carry the room. And like there were like hundreds of people in this large conference hall and she could command them. And I was just like in awe. But at the same time, what was very interesting about her was that she was still very empathetic and welcoming and polite. And I had never seen a leader like that because in my mind, a corporate leader is cutthroat, who like is just like no nonsense girl boss kind of, trying to, be masculine in their energy. And like she was very much, a very empathetic leader. And so I think that's what attracted me to her. And I sort of like went up to her and I was like, it's just so inspiring. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so appreciative that I get to be in this space. And we connected and turns out that she lives in Vancouver. So I asked her for an informational interview. And we were supposed to chat for an hour. We ended up chatting for like almost 3 hours when we met in person. And I just had a feeling. And I was just like, you know what? I'd love for you to be my mentor. I've never really like done this mentorship thing before. But I'd love to do that. And she was so, welcoming and said, okay, just email me with your terms and like what you expect out of this relationship. And we can see how frequently we meet and like all of that. So she's just been like my pillar of strength and like my go-to because again, especially as BIPOC, we don't have communities who are like in these spaces. Like you don't have an uncle or like your dad's friend who is like a CEO or somewhere who you can like meet over family lunch or dinner on the weekend and ask questions. A lot of people with privilege, white folks specifically, they have that privilege where they can just ask their uncle. We don't have that because we have to take care of our families and we're usually children of immigrants, things like that. And so mentorships is one of the ways I feel is very effective in sort of surrounding ourselves with like people who inspire us and like people who we can fall back on. So I told her as well, like, it's like I'm trying to build a network of like strong women who I can look up to and I want to surround myself with so that, I can do more in the space. And she's also then gone on to introduce other amazing, remarkable women that have also been my mentors. So it's not just one person. You got to find a few. So,
totally. Yeah. And finding not only an individual, but a community that you can rely on, right? Especially as newcomer.
Exactly. I was just going to say, because you don't have anybody here, like I don't have anybody here, but I kind of do now. So, yeah.
And so often it's just, we're here for the job and the quality of life as immigrants, but you got to make it worth it. And that includes not only focusing on the professional aspects, but, if we're going to spend a 9 to 5 or, so much effort and energy into these places, even if we believe as much in the good cause we're working for, there has to be other aspects that we fill in. And I think a very big one is people you trust and people who got your back.
Yeah. 100%, especially when you don't really have much of that going on. I think, outside of work as well. And like, I mean, it kind of works to your advantage, but also kind of not. So yeah, you have to like, I think that's also been like a a motivating factor for me, like what you said, where you have to make the most of the time. Because I also feel like I've like invested so much energy and like funds into coming here and building a life here. I might as well give the best that I can to you know, make it work. So,
Totally. Okay, so we've gone through how you got where you are, and so maybe now I'd like to divide this question into things. So first is, without all the jargon and the, you know, heavy terms that may be confusing for most people, because I mean, I myself sometimes feel like that. Sometimes I am in all the different climate jobs that you can get. There's so many different things. It's just getting started. So it's really hard to just, you know, spread yourself too thin.
yeah.
But in the most simple terms, what do you think is the impact that you're doing with the things that you do? And specifically, as we talk about impact, the second part of this question is, how are you finding and navigating creating impacts that try to work within these rigid institutions, or perhaps creating the connections needed for change? I think that through the work that you're doing with leading change, focusing on not only that youth empowerment and gathering, you're also creating networks with your advocacy doing in threading change. And I think this all blends in together, and I can see sort of your personality through your work. But I would like to hear, what do you have to say?
So just want to clarify, you want to know about my impact, hey? I think to me, like, I don't expect to change the world just by myself. And to me, it's the small things that I really find very rewarding. So give you an example, I was just having this chat with Laj, the executive director of Leading Change, the other day, because we're running the Leading Change Fellowship. And, we had a session on financial resilience, and we had the CEO of Financial Resilience Institute, Eloise Duncan. She had spoken at the session, and our fellows, brilliant cohort, by the way, you can go and look them up. And we had this robust conversation around affordability and being a young person, and like managing emergencies, but also climate impact. And there were actual tools these folks were receiving, and I was learning so much as well myself, even though I was facilitating the session. And I was just telling Raj, I was like, people are actually, and then we always have like survey forms. I am a huge data nerd, so I love seeing how people are engaging. And it's like, there was like so much positive feedback on that particular session, and of course all the ones that we've been creating. And I'm like, oh, we did that. Like, people are actually, engaging, and they're finding the stuff we're doing useful. And I think it's always come back to being able to create community and spaces where you can have these conversations. And the same with Threading Change. Like, we had a community quilt making session at Catalano Street Festival over the summer. And basically I wanted data because we had so much foot traffic, and I'm a data person because I do impact reporting. And I was like, what's the best way we can engage the community, but also get some sort of insights? So we ended up with this idea where we would get folks to answer this question, which is, how can we change the fashion industry? And then whoever's passing by, they would write it on like a masking tape, stick it on a small piece of cloth, and then sew it on to this larger quilt that we had. And it would be like a quilt that's made by the community, which is a solutions quilt. And as you know, I'm a passionate person about solutions. And at the end of the thing, we had about almost 200 responses. We had because I was keeping track of who we were talking to, and at 200 responses were people who actually stopped and did the activity. But we spoke to about over 1,000 people. And it was very rewarding to see how the community was coming together by the sewing activity. And they were older folks, as Catalano area, there was just all ages. So like there were like these older ladies that like saw us doing the sewing thing and went back home and brought these little patches to add
No
to the
way.
add to the quilt, and then
That's
they
so
like
cute.
hung around, and you know, were like, they were like kids that were very like, you know, excited by like the sewing thing, and they were like, the older ladies were then teaching these young kids like how to sew, and you know, they were like younger, you know, Gen Z folks that were like, oh, I've never sewed in my life, and I'm like, honestly, same. And then we like got into these conversations about why is it that we don't know how to sew? Like our grandmas used to like basically sew for the entire house. You know, they would make blankets and quilts and like clothes for us. And then somewhere in just the last 2 generations, we've like totally lost the art of sewing because of, well, you know, capitalization and the way that the fashion industry has been. And I think I was able to create a report from that. Of course, the insight was great, but it was just very rewarding to just see that those interactions as well, where like the community was engaging by themselves, and like we just sort of took a step back and like we're just like threading needles for like the next person to use and stuff. And I think that's how I measure my impact, that I'm able to create the spaces to have conversations. And just yesterday, I was at my alma mater, Kwantlen Polytechnic University, and like most of our sustainability program folks there are newcomers as well. And so I was able to sort of take all the knowledge that I'm sharing here this evening to the community and the classroom, and you know, share all the resources as well. And so I think that's my impact. What was the second part of the question?
I think you kind of like
kind of answered it.
sewed
Okay.
it together. But no, that's super inspiring. I actually think I saw you at that booth on that day.
Oh really?
Very briefly.
Ah, you didn't say hi.
Must have been a lot of people that. But
Yeah, it was crowded. Yeah, it was Vinya and I that were there.
I think I said hi to Vinya, and you were explaining or talking with someone, so it might have been that.
I see. Yeah.
I enjoyed hearing a bit more about threading change, and in the spirit of your solutionism, I would like to ask you, how is it working in an industry that by itself is grounded in being unsustainable and trying to change, I mean, a whole paradigm in something that is so attached to us, but then we're not attached to the craft and to the production of all of this?
You know, it's very interesting because the fashion industry, so my capstone for my project last year before I graduated was also like a research paper that I did on like the textile industry and just like the behaviors and how people interact with textile policy, things like that. It's very interesting because the fashion industry accounts for more emissions than the aviation industry. Aviation industry is only 5% of global emissions. Fashion industry is 10%. According to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And it's very insidious because everybody needs to wear clothes, right? And they're just so easily accessible, but people don't think about it all that much, especially because it's just so much easier to like, you know, buy the cheap clothes instead of like learning how to mend and all that, right? So it is very insidious. But the thing is, like, this industry is like a kraken. It's got its tentacles everywhere and it's very insidious. But I think what I have learned, you know, being a threading change and just sort of, you have to be, as you might have been guessing already, I'm a radical optimist. And so you have to be able to imagine a future where we're not in these complex supply systems, you know? And so I think, wait, I gotta take a look at my notes. I kind of like wrote my stuff down.
Go. I'm actually gonna stop browsing. I think that they might us to finish soon. Hello.
Sorry.
You need to close on right now? Can you give me another 5 minutes?
5 minutes? 5 minutes is fine. We can do that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
That should be good. We can hop on a wrapping up question, and then it should be good. But I'm finding that the interview is quite complete, so I'm not super rushed.
I appreciate that. Okay. So, one sec. Yeah, so like my work at Threading Change specifically is more strategy and figuring out how, you know, we can continue doing the work that we do. Because one thing that I've observed is just creating spaces for communities to come together, like time and time again. Whenever we do like our fair fashion festivals or like any sort of swaps and everything, everybody always has positive, like community members come up to us and they're always like, hey, you guys are doing amazing work. Young people are like, oh, you know, like say if they're going to fashion school or something, they're like, we love how accessible the programming is and like how accessible the events is, because we cannot find something like this anywhere else. So we've seen that if you can have these conversations and you can create these conversation starters, you know, like it can move mountains. And so we kind of want to like continue doing that at Threading Change as well. But in my work specifically, this is where my business and economics sort of expertise come in. I've noticed that, you know, it's great that you're fostering the community thing, but unless you can back it up with data for the brands and for the governments to see, you can't really get anywhere. And another learning that I've had from my work at Threading Change is, you know, at the end of the day, it's policy that is going to drive change. But what's interesting though is that the community does not make a connection with policy and clothing. So they're very much aware of the brands that are causing harm, but they don't make the connection that it's actually the governments that can do something about it, which is very interesting, because my theory, or like, you know, based on the data that I've been processing and the surveys that we've been doing, is that they are not making the connection because clothing is a very personal choice, and they just look at it as affordability, a personal choice, a personal thing, and they're not thinking about how the government plays a role in the choice that they have available. So that's something that we want to continue working on. So the education element on, you know, like engaging the communities, but also, you know, creating spaces like Threading Change just joined the Fair Labor Association, where it's an association of coalition of brands and civil society organizations that come together to the discussion table to, you know, talk about how to create ethical labor practices. Because again, like the fashion industry is not just about the waste that they create, it's about the labor practices. Because the reason your clothes are so cheap is because somebody paid for it by not getting paid for their labor. You know, there is these massive brands, LVMH, you know, Lululemon, all these CEOs are multimillionaires, billionaires. It's because the workers didn't get paid. That's wage theft. So how do we ensure, like, we create a more just society? And Threading Change, because we are the only youth-led fashion, ethical fashion nonprofit in the world, we are radically imagining what the fashion industry can look like, and we're tackling all aspects. So whether it be labor, whether it be waste, whether it be innovation, like we're sort of doing, we're trying to spread our tentacles into these and, like, you know, sort of like be an antidote to the ones that are there. So
yeah, the anti-Kraken of the fashion industry.
Exactly. Oh my god, we should do that. We should like change our name to that, like our description, the anti-Kraken. So, yeah.
Oh man, that's amazing. Well, that's great, because I find that there's one quote that makes me think after hearing you, and it's that we're not outnumbered, we're out-organized. And you know, beginning to see how you are connecting this movement and advocacy to scale it up and to be data-backed and to be also community-born seems that it can be powerful, and that it is sort of a new antidote that, at least in the fashion industry, hasn't been exerted, and I'm really excited to see how it comes up. In the interest of wrapping up, I'd like to just ask you if you have any other messages for BIPOC youth searching their passion and finding their place and their family in Canada as well, that can help them out in this process. And or if you have anything else that you want to share from the family at Leading Change and Threading Change.
Yes, I will take you up on that. But like, start off by first recognizing my privilege, because the story that I've shared, there has been a lot of points of privilege that I haven't been able to make clear. So for example, the reason I could go to these conferences and take time off work was because I didn't have children. Like a lot of my classmates who I would then bring information back to, who were newcomers as well, could not come to these conferences with me because they had little children, or that they couldn't get the time off work, and like Vancouver's expensive. I could take that pinch because my family is somebody I didn't have to worry about. They were happy and healthy, and they were safe, and so I didn't have to worry about like any financial obligations towards them. So I want to make that clear before I give any advice, that grounding myself in my experience, and of course everybody's going to have different experiences as well, and responsibilities, not to mention us BIPOC folk usually have to look out for our parents and our siblings and all of that. I haven't had that responsibility. I'm a younger sibling, so it's been I have had a lot of privilege. So based on that, the advice that I would give, if you're able, get in people's faces. Just get out there. There are a lot of resources. Green Career Center is doing amazing work. I mean, if they're listening to you, they already have a lot of these resources. But get in people's faces, ask questions, reach out, do the informational interviews, and sort of get involved. Again, volunteering in itself is also like a privilege, so I recognize that. But if you're able, volunteer, and also share the knowledge and expertise that you're bringing. Like this was something that I shared yesterday at KPU as well, that if you're able, go to these places, but make sure you bring something back for your friends and your community who cannot be in these spaces. So for example, what I did last year was I actually met some people who are working on energy transition in Quebec, and I actually brought them on as guest speakers for my energy transition class, so that like everybody else could learn. So things like that, if you're able, do that, and surround yourself, build your community, your support system. There's especially, I love this thing about our industry, our sustainability sector, is that everybody wants to help, because everybody knows that I only succeed if you succeed, and everybody's eager to help and mentor, and you just have to be in these spaces to like sort of start doing that. Threading change, our motto is always collaboration over competition, and
Lovely.
and we try to share resources as much as possible, and if we can all adopt that, then we can do that. We can actually create like a sustainable future as well. And the last advice that I would, plugs that I would have, is if you're looking to get into these spaces, as I'm telling you, Leading Change is accepting applications for delegates to attend our conference, Leading Change Summit, on 10th of February 2025. Your pass would also give you an option to attend Globe Exchange, where you get
Lovely.
to learn from industry leaders in all sectors, whichever sector you're interested in. So check us out. And with Reading Change, we are taking a little bit of a slow time, just because we've had a very busy summer. But come January, February, we're back at it, and we will be, follow us on Instagram and follow our activities, not only in Canada, but we're actually doing a festival in Nairobi just as we are having this conversation.
Wow.
So follow us, and there, we are always looking for volunteers to help with the events as well. So yeah.
Lovely. Yeah. Look out for the Fair Fashion festivals and some booths. I've gone to them, and the swaps are immaculate. So thank you so much, Aish. It has been such a pleasure to hear from all of your stories, and not only that, but all of the knowledge and wisdom that comes behind them. Because it seems that it's not only yours, but from all the people behind you that have succeeded before you, and that have led you to succeed in so many different ways. So I really appreciate that, and I think that you're doing great work to not only get yourself out there, but your community as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a privilege for sure.
All right. Well, give you a hug.
Thank you.